Here's one of the differences between a player like Lin and a player like Harden. I think a player like Lin is all about doing things to win games, and sometimes the byproduct of him doing things to win games is that he gets these superstar stats. But for James Harden, it's the reverse. I think James Harden is all about doing things that make him a superstar or make him like the hero. And sometimes the byproduct of James Harden going for his stats and scoring and all of that is that the Rockets win games. But that's just a byproduct for Harden. I think Harden is more concerned with his stats than he is about winning games or with, being the hero, which is shocking to me, because when Harden joined the Rockets, I saw him as an unselfish player. And when I saw Harden play for the Rockets for the first time, I was like, this guy's a superstar. And I was so happy because I was like, this guy's a superstar, but he's unselfish, because he checked his ego and was like a six man for that whole time he was with OKC, knowing that he was much more capable of that, but he was humble enough to accept his role as a sixth man. So I thought, man, we got a superstar who's unselfish. So I was really psyched about James Harden. But then the longer I've seen him, with all the ISO hero balling and stuff, I've realized that he's the type of player who actually cares more about looking good, like being the superstar, being the hero and stuff, caring about his stats, than winning games. I'm not saying that he doesn't care about winning games. I'm just saying to him, it's about achieving stats, and he thinks if he gets these stats, the Rockets will win games. Winning games is sort of a byproduct of him getting his stats. But for Lin, it's all about winning. What can I do to win games? And sometimes he'll have these superstar stats to as a fortunate byproduct of him trying to do all these things to win games. And I think this was kind of telling in the post-game interviews of this Cavs game. Again, we don't really know what Lin is actually thinking or whatever, but in Lin's post-game interview, when they asked him, did you know that you were on your way to getting triple-double or whatever, he was like, I really didn't until I was 2 assists away. Then everyone was talking about it. So that's what Lin says. Who knows if that's true or not, but if we do take him at his word, you kind of contrast that with what Harden said and what Howard said when the interviewer asked them about, did Lin know that he was on his way to triple-double, and Harden was like, oh yeah, he knew. He's just saying that he doesn't because it looks good. But then Harden was also like, I'm not sure if he knew. So he kind of corrected himself at the end, but his initial sort of reaction was, yeah, of course he knew. I mean, because I think, again, that sort of, if we take them at their word, who knows, Lin could be just saying something that sounds good or whatever, so we don't really know. But if we take Lin's response at its face and we take Harden's response at its face, then that is sort of an interesting contrast that supports what I was saying earlier, how Lin is all about winning games and the stats is a byproduct. And for Harden, it's all about this, not all about, but the stats are, he's kind of trying to get his stats, and then winning is a byproduct of him getting his stats. So just the way they answer that question tells you kind of what's more important to, it kind of confirms what I said about that. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. And, again, that's not really any factual data or anything. That's just kind of my intuitive sense. And I still don't know if Lin did know or did not know. Who knows? But it's interesting the way they answer those questions. But I think this has implications for how Lin was quote unquote struggling before the Spurs game where he got to start because James Harden got injured. I think when he got put back into a substitution role, or a secondary a role coming off the bench or whatever, I think he felt like he wasn't really part of the team. He felt sort of ignored, and he felt like the team didn't really need him to win games. So when Lin feels like he is not a big part of the team winning, then for him that destroys his will to play aggressively, because he's like, if I'm not part of winning, then what's the point? What's the point of doing anything? Because he felt like the team didn't need him to win games, or the team wasn't dependent on him to win games. So I think that's why he started playing very passively. But when Harden went down and he had to start, then he felt a burden on him of filling this big void that Harden left. And that's when he felt like the team needed him to win games. And so that's why he started playing more aggressively. And so I think that too plays into that idea that I think Jeremy Lin is more about winning, and his superstar stats are just a fortunate byproduct of that. And of course, with the Cavs game, even though he came off the bench, he's still rolling on that momentum of feeling like he's a bigger part of the team. Guys started passing to him more because James Harden wasn't there, so they kind of had no choice but to pass it to him. So he felt included in the team, and so he's kind of riding on that momentum now. We'll see, how long it lasts, but I think that's an interesting sort of contrast between those two players. So for James Harden, not to say that it doesn't matter to him about winning. It's just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to get my stats, and if I get my stats, maybe the team wins, maybe it doesn't, but I'll just get my stats. So far I've been talking about how Lin is all about winning from more of a qualitative perspective. I want to switch gears slightly and look at some data that does support this idea that Jeremy Lin is all about winning. Of course, when we talk about Lin winning, we can't forget the fact that that's what Lin's sanity was all about. He wasn't just having great games, he was actually winning for the team, and he was winning with a bunch of scrubs. He was beating teams like the Lakers and the Mavericks with pretty much a very mediocre supporting cast. And moreover, the Knicks actually started losing when they got back their superstars, and Lin had to take a back seat. So those should be indications that Lin is all about winning, and he helps teams win when he's the primary focus. So I've given you so far more of a qualitative discussion about James Harden and Jeremy Lin, and how Jeremy Lin is all about winning, and his superstar stats are merely a byproduct of all the things that he does to win games. For James Harden, it's more about his stats, and winning is sort of a byproduct of him trying for his superstar stats or trying to be a hero and things like that. So another way to look at it is, let's look at the games in which Rockets were playing this season when James Harden was injured versus the Rockets playing without Jeremy Lin when Jeremy Lin was injured. So if we look at the data, and obviously caveats about the small sample size, but this is the only sample size we have, so it's in no way definitive proof, but it's just more data to sort of support this idea. So with the Rockets playing without James Harden, they are 6 wins and 2 losses. So they've played 8 games. They have a 75% winning percentage. And the Rockets playing without Jeremy Lin, they're 6 and 4, meaning they've won 60% of their games, which is worse than what they're currently doing. But when we dig into the data even further, it becomes even more apparent. When the Rockets were playing without James Harden, they actually played against tougher teams than when the Rockets were playing without Jeremy Lin. So that's very interesting to point out. When the Rockets were playing without Jeremy Lin, they played 5 teams under 500. Basically half of the teams they played were, mediocre or really bad teams. And these are not just teams that are barely under 500. These are teams that are the very bottom of the barrel, like Utah Jazz, Orlando, or Sacramento, who are currently last in their divisions. When the Rockets were playing without James Harden, they only played against 2 teams that were under 500, Detroit and Philadelphia. And Detroit is not exactly bottom of the barrel. They have a winning percentage of around 43%. Rockets beat San Antonio when they play without James Harden as well as without Jeremy Lin. So that's sort of the only thing that's kind of similar. But the other big difference is when they played without James Harden, they beat the Memphis Grizzlies, which is a team that the Rockets have a lot of trouble with. So even though the sample size is small, this data, as well as the qualitative difference between Jeremy Lin and James Harden, does provide some indication that Jeremy Lin is more important to winning games for the Houston Rockets than James Harden is. But of course, I think that's something that's really hard to swallow for a lot of people, and it's something that they're unwilling to accept. But again, it's not really just the data. I think there's a fundamental difference between Jeremy Lin, the type of player he is, and the type of player James Harden is. And I think that's why that data is telling you what it is telling you, despite your perceptions. Jeremy Lin is really all about winning. And you think about James Harden and all of the hero balling during end of game situations, and how he even goes against Kevin McHale during end of game situations. He did that a lot last season, and I think he's continuing to do that some, but maybe he's let off a little bit. But he has taken it upon himself to go ISO during end of game situations, and sometimes it works, but most of the time it doesn't work. And you think about how many times close games the Rockets have lost, and a lot of it was because of James Harden. So, but it's not just the end of game situations. You think about all the possessions that James Harden has wasted trying to be the hero, especially during the end of quarters and things like that, and times when he is really forcing the issue and turning the ball over because he's trying to make something happen when he could be passing to his teammates and let them make something happen. While it may be very hard to swallow, because your perception of James Harden is that he's the superstar and he's he's the man in the Houston Rockets, and Jeremy Lin is just some average role player whose existence is barely noticed in some games. What a lot of people miss is that when James Harden is out, Jeremy Lin becomes the man, and the Rockets become a different team. They become more team-oriented, they share the ball better, they move the ball better. In fact, that's what Linsanity was all about. It was about unselfishness, it was about sharing the ball, it was about team basketball. The thing is, people don't have a very large sample size of what this team looks like with Jeremy Lin being the primary guy. So it's hard for people to imagine that all we have is these 8 games. But I would argue that if you break away from your perceptions, you will see that we do have a lot more information, such as Linsanity, such as the type of player Jeremy Lin is, how he's all about team basketball, and team basketball wins games. And the thing is, Jeremy Lin with the Rockets still has not been used properly, and even when James Harden is out, he's still not used properly. So I understand how it's very hard for Rockets fans to even accept this idea that the team could actually win more games with Jeremy Lin versus with James Harden. I understand that that's very hard to swallow, but I think it's short-sighted to dismiss this idea blindly because you think this is a ridiculous idea based on your perceptions. The Rockets fans have seen Lin in a misused role for so long that they're kind of used to that perception of Lin. So it's hard for them to imagine what Lin would be if he was, sort of the primary guy. They just don't see how some guy who's barely noticed in some games could be that important to the Rockets winning. An ESPN analyst, Robin Lundberg, provided a stat that said Jeremy Lin averages 21 points, 6.5 assists when James Harden is out. And this is not just for this season. I think this is for since Jeremy Lin has been with the Houston Rockets, so it's for both seasons. So Jeremy Lin is a totally different player when James Harden is out, and this is what a lot of Rockets fans miss, and this is why they sort of scoff at this idea that Jeremy Lin could actually be possibly more important to Rockets winning games than James Harden is the sample size of Jeremy Lin, without James Harden is so small. They haven't experienced Jeremy Lin playing, the way Jeremy Lin plays when he's the primary focus, averaging 21 points, 6.5 assists, and again, this is with Jeremy Lin not being used properly still. So it's kind of interesting and shows a little bit of the dysfunction of the Rockets organization that when James Harden is playing, Jeremy Lin is probably like the the sixth man or whatever. He's like almost the forgotten man on the team. But when James Harden is out, all of a sudden Jeremy Lin becomes the man on the team. So how can in one instance he becomes the man, becomes the focus for the Rockets in one instance and then is completely forgotten in another instance? That shows you sort of things that I've discussed to death about how inconsistent the Rockets have been treating Jeremy Lin, and how they've mistreated and misused him. But anyway, that's a whole other discussion. Getting back to the data, so I went through and looked at data for Jeremy Lin playing 30 minutes or more and compared that with Patrick Beverley playing 30 minutes or more, because I just wanted to see how it affects the Rockets from the standpoint of winning games when Jeremy Lin plays 30 minutes or more or when Patrick Beverley plays 30 minutes or more. So here's the data that I've gathered, and keep in mind that this is with Jeremy Lin being misused in the Rockets organization, but it's still pretty striking. The data is still pretty striking. So the total number of games is very similar for both players. So it's 25 for Patrick Beverley playing 30 minutes more, and 26 for Jeremy Lin, 30 minutes or more. The win rate, however, is drastically different. For Patrick Beverley, you're like a above 500 team, but for Jeremy Lin, you are like the number one. You're like one of the top teams in the league with a 76.9% win rate. 20 games, winning 20 games out of 26. versus 14 games out of 25. And just to be fair, I wanted to look into the data just to see, the quality of the teams and things like that. So with Patrick Beverley, the Rockets played against 7 Eastern Conference teams, which is about 30%, and it's similar with Jeremy Lin. It's about 8. The reason why I highlighted Eastern Conference teams because they're obviously easier. Or I see the East as much easier competition wise than the West, so the winning percentage in the East for Eastern Conference teams is sort of skewed higher than it probably should be. So that's why I kind of just threw that in there just to see. So teams under 500, with Patrick Beverley, there's 40% of the teams that the Rockets face had records under 500. Jeremy Lin is 65.4%. So you can't say that Jeremy Lin playing 30 minutes or more faced slightly easier teams, but actually when you dig into the data even more, you see that this is slightly deceiving. I think teams that are, say, slightly under 500 are very different competitive wise versus teams that are well below 500. So that's why I kind of separate that even more. And if you do that, then you'll see that Patrick Beverley playing 30 minutes or more, the Rockets faced only 2 teams that were the ones that were kind of slightly below 500, which I still consider pretty competitive, because those are the teams that are pretty dangerous, because you kind of let your guard down and things like that. There's teams that could still beat any other team on any given night. As you can see, the Rockets only faced 2 teams, whereas with Jeremy Lin playing 30 minutes or more, the Rockets faced 6 teams, basically 3 times the number of teams that were in the 500 to 4,500 range. So while it is true that Jeremy Lin playing 30 minutes or more face more teams under 500, more of those teams were in the 500 to 4,500 range. So that's why I said the data is a little bit deceiving if you don't really break it down. And finally, when it comes to teams over 6,500, these are sort of the top tier teams. As you can see, Beverley playing 30 minutes or more faced 5 of those teams, and Jeremy Lin faced 3 of those teams. So just wanted to throw that out there. But my view is that when you're talking about winning or losing, yeah, the competition does matter, but at the same time, on any given night, any team could beat any other team. So I think overall you do need to take into consideration the competitiveness of the teams, but also buy into this idea that a win is a win. Anyway, that's the data, so you take it or leave it. Interpret it however you want to interpret it. I'm just giving you the data. So now that we've looked at the stats for Beverley and Lin playing 30 minutes or more, let's look at the stats of them playing less than 30 minutes. So I'm not going to go through too much in detail, since you're pretty familiar with all the data by now, since I went through it on the other one. It's the same set of data that I'm sort of comparing. So but the overall big picture is with Patrick playing less than 30 minutes, the Rockets are undefeated. So they played 10 games and they've won all 10 games. For Jeremy Lin, it's a completely different story. They played 17 games. They've only won 10 of those 17 games, or less than 60%, which is worse than what they're currently doing. Without going into the data too much and comparing them, overall takeaway is that with Patrick Beverley playing less than 30 minutes, the Rockets did play much easier teams than with Jeremy Lin playing less than 30 minutes. So that's kind of the overall takeaway, but it's still kind of crazy that the Rockets are undefeated when Patrick Beverley plays less than 30 minutes, and they're, you know, close to 50% or 60% with Jeremy Lin playing less than 30 minutes. So that's kind of the overall takeaway there. Again, you know, there's the data. You can interpret it however way you want to interpret it. I'm just giving you the data. So anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this somewhat lengthy discussion. I will talk to you soon. As usual, thumbs up, thumbs down, give me the comments below, subscribe, share the videos, and don't forget to follow me on Twitter. Thanks. It's my Twitter is Jeremy Lintel, and I'll put it in the description below. Thanks.